after that, many of you have been watching it, restoring one of just closed. Filming?
Yeah, I just have a little bit there.
Yeah. Let's see. Twist it around.
Just pop it off.
Oh,
I can
you
do
do
it. Yeah, I'll break it. Here we go. No, we're not. I already put it on there.
Wonderful. So I've got a mic. Is that on the amplifier? No. Okay. So this mic. Ah. Oh, I had a great starting line and I've forgotten it. I'm. Yeah. I even knew that. But I'm exploring the wonders of old age now, and that comes along with forgetting about the switch 20 minutes after you figured it out, and other things too. So, well, now where to start? I could start with a reading, but let me just do a little introduction for those who don't know. I was born and raised in Philadelphia. I was the second son in the family, so fortunately the eldest son attracted all of the anguish and angst of the parents, and he has become a famous emeritus professor of evolutionary biology. He never left school, and as those who have read my book will know that I describe him as my smarter older brother, which is not an original phrase. And he started a computer club in high school. The high school was the elite public high school in Philadelphia, Central High School. And I am a graduate, so it all devolves upon me. But he was a senior, I was a freshman. I had my electronics shop down in the basement. He was doing his biology, nature walks, and bird watching to get himself out of the house. I went to the basement to get myself out of society in the house. And he began looking at books on computers. This was 1959. There weren't very many books on computers, and they all dated from the 1940s. So he showed me some books with schematics in them of modules that were used in computers. And these were schematics drawn for engineers who could figure out quite well enough, thank you, what the values of the parts should be given what their constraints were. You didn't need to publish them as a do-it-yourself book. They said, can you build this? Can you make this stuff work? And I did not really feel I had the option of saying no, which was true to a certain extent. I'll explain that. But I said, I think so. Good, you'll be the chief engineer. So we went about trying to build flip-flops using 6SN7 vacuum tubes and using cigar boxes as chassis. And we were very advanced, you see. And so we used the method of inputting a pulse to the circuit was taking a bare wire and flicking it against the metal Felsenstein clip. Now, it turns out, much later, I found out that's one of the most reliable ways of generating random pulse trains. And so the best reliability we were ever able to get on the equipment was 50%. they have to admit it was probably working quite well, given input like that. And of course, Philadelphia was the center of the computer industry at the time because the ENIAC had been developed there, and Eckert and Walkley went and started first the Eckert and Walkley Computer Corporation, imaginative name, but that quickly became UNIVAC and quickly got bought by Remington Rand. And I know as a member of a recreation center computer club, no, not computer club, sorry, electronics club, whose instructor was an engineer at UNIVAC. We all got taken to a nighttime tour of the plant, not the whole plant, but just the area where he was working, where they had a console set up and so forth. And he did things with the console, didn't explain them, though it would have been hard to explain. And I didn't understand what was going on. And it never struck me. Well, let's put it this way. I was a freshman. And we didn't have a very effective faculty advisor. Our faculty advisor wanted to give us tests to complete his master's thesis on something or other, and then he bugged out. Had we had a proper faculty advisor, because they were all pretty much male then, would have said, in fact, all the students were male. That was one of the things that's been corrected. He would have said, look, call them up and ask for help. And I would have said, I can't do that. I'm just a freshman. Whatever. I mean, the discussion, that's the skill of being a faculty advisor, which never happened. And I know that the two principals, Eckert and Walkley, they lived in the Bay Area, there I go again, in Philadelphia, or around Philadelphia. I think I've just recently learned that Walkley lived in Ambler, which is suburban, and I never would have been able to find his number and I wouldn't even know what phone book to look in. But whatever. The idea being, I should have called the company, gone through whatever the layers were, and asked, "Hey, can you send an engineer out to have a talk with us about some of the things we might not be doing right?" Okay, never entered my mind, because it was all about, for a kid, an electronics kid, I have to do everything right, and everything has to work, or I'm no good. Now, also being a younger brother, that puts me in that situation too. And so we didn't do it. But in fact, we could have done it. And I now know exactly what that engineer would have said, would have told us to do. Hey, take one of those flip-flops and make it a debouncer. And here's how you do that. And now you can flick it all you want, but this thing will take away all those random pulses and give you a nice square edge. I even had an oscilloscope, because that's another story that's really too long to go into. I mean, brought it in there, and somebody knocked the tip off of the tube and evacuated it. And so we used it as a vicious joke on one of our people by, grabbing them and smashing the tube with a hammer in his face. But, it didn't implode. It had already been evacuated. Whatever. So that's what we were doing in high school. So I then concluded that this business with digital stuff is really too finicky. You get one error and the whole thing blows up. We didn't have enough going to blow up, but you knew that would happen. Everything's got to be perfect all the time. I'll stay with analog, thank you, because that stuff is called noise, and it's part of the game. But noise of that sort is not tolerated in computers. So no computers for me, thank you. And I went ahead and learned analog electronics, and it wasn't until 10 years later, 1970, that I was given the choice of get this digital system together, do the programming all by yourself, because we're laying off people, or you'll get laid off. And I did that. And I had my transcendental experience. Fortunately, I'd had about all but the last 6 months of a curriculum in electrical engineering at UC Berkeley and 4 years of experience, no, not by that time, 2 years experience working in industry, and all of my electronic hobbyist stuff, which helped get me that job. So I knew pretty much what to do, except the programming. That was terra incognita for me. And so there was that moment when we had our Data General Nova. I don't believe it was, could have been a baseband Nova. They turned out the first one is the Nova. And then they came up with the Nova 800, which is 800 nanoseconds faster. And then the Nova 1200, which is sort of slower and cheaper. So it might have been a 1200 or it might have been just the baseband Nova that we started with. This was at Ampex. They owned magnetic tape at that time. And I was in the special products division, which had to be able to build any odd thing that anybody wanted. And it turns out many decades later, I learned the main client was the government. It was the spook shop. And it had developed the video cassette recorder as to be put in plywood drones and flown over the Soviet Union, making videotapes of things they wanted to look at, popping out its cassette. That's where that came from, which then got parachuted down to a plane that was trolling for it. And, that's kind of high cost stuff. Anyway, they didn't know what to do with the video cassette recorder afterwards. They just gave it to Japan Victor Corporation somehow. I heard that from some executives later. And presto, the JVC VHS recorder takes over the world. So at one point in the book, I used the phrase Tales of Silicon Valley Glory, referring to my disastrous startup and so forth. There's plenty of that to go around. Okay, so there I was with a room full of pieces of equipment. I won't go into in any great detail, but they had to be choreographed by the computer. And I was doing the programming in assembler. And the first thing I had to do was to write the code that talked to the teletype. Now, I was using the teletype. It talked to the assembler program, but that's not the program. So I had to write it, and the manual had an example. Of course, I wasn't going to do anything other than what the manual said. And it said, this is like, I don't know if it called it inline code, but I got told it was inline code, which means self-modifying code. Saying you have a series of instructions, and then there's a space where there's zeros. There's one location, and you have to write the ASCII code of the letter in there. And when you execute the code, it says, send what is that at that location, hardwired, to the teletype. Okay, I put it, the ASCII A, which is, 40 or something, and 40 hex in there, waiting for the inevitable, and got everything set up, and I pushed the run switch, and chunk, there was an A on the paper. Wow! That was my inauguration into the world of software. And I was successful at it. There's nothing, I haven't been successful at everything. So anyway, then it was digital as of 1970. Well, I have a bone to pick with the MIT guys who write those books that say, being digital. like you can turn yourself into a piece of digital stuff, which is not material. No thank you. And I talk in there when we get to the section on the Dampier music. Steve Dampier, an intuitive genius who empirically discovered that his Altair had an analog output that no one knew about. It was the electronic noise that it generated. Anybody who's seen an Altair, there's a big, they connect the bus to the front panel. Somebody said, just use wires. We didn't think about this, how you're going to mechanically do it so that it's proper controlled impedance and stuff. So it's a big bunch of wires that you have to actually fan them out to make it work reliably, because otherwise you get what's called pattern sensitivity. That is to say, if you bundle it neatly, and I saw one that was sold this way, you better cut that bundle up and fan it out, because they're going to couple signals to each other, and it worsens your noise environment significantly. So Dampier discovered that he could listen to his Altair doing little sort routines, which is all he could program from the front panel, because he got the first Altair in the Bay Area, as far as I could tell. And when the sort routine was running through its sort, the loop got shorter and shorter. And so the repetition rate got higher and higher. And so what he heard on his weather radio, and a good thing, because weather radios usually listen to nothing at all, so they're open channels, was like zip, 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 zip. And he didn't know what this was. So we investigated, found out about the loops and so forth. Realized he had a music program here. 30 hours of straight programming later, he had his code. Brought it down to the third meeting of the Homebrew Computer Club. Set it up without telling anybody what it was. He had to toggle in the code. Somebody kicked out the plug. He had to do it again. He'd say, wait, 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 wait. Then he pushes a switch. And out comes a sufficiently computerized version of Fool on the Hill, which was the first sheet music he found in his house. And everyone's, amazed. And he says, then it ends. And he says, wait, wait, wait. After a few seconds, it starts playing Daisy, Daisy. Daisy, Daisy, give me your answer, do. No, it's not doing voice. As you know, the tune that HAL 9000 regressed to when it was being lobotomized in 2001, Space Odyssey, which was also the tune, of course, that historically was the first computer music played, programmed by Max Matthews, whom I managed to meet and work with at Interval Research in 1961 on an IBM 709. And that, enough people in the audience knew this fact that they gave him a roaring standing ovation. It was really a landmark in personal computing. Now, he published this program in our little sort of underground paper, People's Computer Company. And a fellow named Bill Gates, and we knew he existed, in Micro-Soft in Albuquerque, New Mexico, operating out of the MITS plant. I see here now, this is clearly a fraud, because there's no output instruction. And how can you output anything from a program with no output instruction? I don't know if he's yet got the point. I think he has. That, hey, this is the world outside. We're analog. The whole world is analog. That computer's analog too, even though it's not supposed to be. And Steve Dampier managed to unlock it. Okay. So I've wandered about a bit here. So let me do my first reading of how I became an explorer. And if you've seen my Patreon page, that's all about letting people look over my shoulder as I do my adventures. And it's, you know, I have to come up with an adventure every month. To be doing. So, wait. Oh, must have been this. Yeah, the police radio incident. To set the scene, 1964, during the free speech movement, which was a 2-month effort to counteract the university administration's. Let's say that's original.
Telegraph, actually.
Yeah, right. That certainly has livened it up. Okay, university administration's attempt to suppress the organizing in support of the civil rights movement in the Bay Area. We were demonstrations and employment discriminations going on, and they were big and messy, and people got arrested, and they were being organized more or less from groups on the UC campus, and the administration said, you can't do that. We said, free speech obtains on a public university campus. We can. They said, no, you can't. You'll get thrown off. And of course, the Supreme Court had already decided on this, that speech includes organizing and that sort of thing. And they can't say, well, you can't mount demonstrations that might result in violations of law. So we got to stop you from doing it at the BS. So you can't sell bumper stickers. You can't keep these tables there when what you honestly believe is outside campus, but turned out to be inside. And of course, that was when Freedom Summer was just over, and the veterans of that were returning like shell-shocked military veterans to campus with tales of what they had encountered in the Deep South, which was the point of Freedom Summer. And nobody was in any mood to lie down and let them roll over. So this was all going on, and it was, as I say, a 2-month process. It was not a single demonstration where Marius ever gave a speech, which I can read here. And everybody, did a sit-in, and then bang, bang, that was it. No, it took 2 months. So I cannot recall the date, but it was while the day-to-day struggle was underway with rallies and leafleting. I was at the FSM central office as usual. By the way, I was on a work-study work period, and fortuitously wound up returning to my job on campus. So I was on campus with no homework or other responsibilities, and actually earning money. Making myself available in case anyone came up with something I could do with my talents to help. Now, I think I explained this later, but my point is that my view of myself at that point was, I'm going to learn how to be a little tiny engineering cog in a great big engineering machine, part of industry, and I'll do my little bit to help advance society towards a labor-free future, or something like that. And so I saw myself as being distinctly inferior to all of these other frighteningly intelligent graduate students and so forth, some of them as old as 24. And I was 19. And this makes a difference then. So I'm going to be there, and I'm going to keep my eyes open and try to see if somebody who's smarter than I am will tell me what they need to have done technologically. Right. Suddenly the front door flew open, and a small group of people burst in shouting, "The campus is surrounded by police." I went into an altered state of consciousness at that moment, in which it seemed that every eye was fixated on me. I heard the demand in unison from every voice, "Quick, make us a police radio." In fact, it was Marilyn Noble, our self-appointed house mother, speaking. And at a lower level of my consciousness, I knew this. Her father was a mechanical engineer who had worked on the development of the legendary DC-3 airliner in the 1930s. She was channeling him, apparently. In 1939, the demand would have made sense. The police radio bands were positioned just off the dial above the regular AM broadcast band. A simple adjustment of the local oscillator frequency would bring these down into the working range of the radio. So it's just a one adjustment. But this was 1964, and police bands were now much, much higher in frequency, and narrowband FM as well. Even regular FM receivers would require re-engineering to be able to receive them at all. In fact, they were derived from the walkie-talkie developments during World War II. You don't, let's see, but this was not, okay, this all flashed up from my memory instantaneously. How to explain? You don't understand, I stammered. It takes time. All eyes remain fixed on me in my state of consciousness. Never mind about that, came the chorus of reply. Make us a police radio. I had seen a construction article some months prior within a hobbyist magazine for a police radio receiver. It would take days or weeks of work to build and test it. One part of my mind started to work on that project, which was not what was being requested. It eventually became an intercom amplifier. The other part of my mind experienced an epiphany. I had been following a futile strategy all along. I couldn't make anything happen instantaneously. It did take time and learning many things and trying them and failing and correcting and retrying. I had to take the path of the explorer, learning all the time, progressing wherever there was something to learn, judging continuously whether I should change course, continuously building out my set of tools and skills. No one would wait for me. I would be on my own. If I succeeded, then the next time I found myself facing an urgent demand for technology, I would be able to reply, well, you can't have that, but here's something that might serve. As I reached back into the shelf of items I had developed and accumulated. Nobody would protest. What would there be their alternatives? If my offering was useless, they would never ask me again. If the artifact was of use, they would happily accept it into their lives as the way to solve that problem. I might even gain support for my explorations. It turned out that the alarm was a false one. The huge Berkeley campus could never be surrounded except by an army with great effort and disruption, and everyone should have known that. I had just experienced at a deep level the fact that those whom I placed above myself as my intellectual leaders were fallible humans lacking my experience and knowledge. I discovered viscerally that I had to be my own leader or I would be a fool. I suspect that quite a few others around me were discovering the same thing at the time. That was probably the luckiest thing that ever happened to me. You know, I finally had my introduction to management. And in fact, Berkeley specialized in turning out managers. And so I was free. And I was, bereft of any support at the same time. Well, life's a bit like that. And that change in direction is something that I've maintained ever since. And of course, I found ways to fit it into revenue generating activity. These things here, the computers for the benefit of those who are streaming. And the book is about that process. Let me find another place. Among other interesting people that I met in the process was a guy named Ivan Illich. He was Austrian by birth. He had come up through the Catholic hierarchy as a Jesuit. He had reached near the top in New York, and he got off of that because of the politics, and set himself up as the Center for Intercultural Documentation in Cuernavaca, Mexico. Okay, fine. But what he had done was look into the advent of radio in Central America and what happened there. He discovered that 2 years after radio arrived in a village, there were people there who knew how to fix it. Where had those people come from? Well, they hadn't attended the RCA Institute. They weren't shipped in from outside. They were there all along. They learned on the spot by tampering with the radio, experimentally, how to do elementary diagnosis and repair. Just all you had to know to start with was that tubes could be replaced, tubes would burn out, and you could take them to the city and have them tested, and presumably buy replacement tubes wherever you had them tested. That's step one for radio repair at the time, for vacuum tube radio repair. Now, consider semiconductor radios. They're not very repairable at all. If you put a soldering iron in one of them, things fall off. And, I had this experience myself. But I grew up with a pile of old vacuum tube radio and TV chassis that, through my father's network of friends, were heaped in a derelict store somewhere. And we made several trips with him driving, with me hauling back junk like this, which I stripped down to the bare metal, took all the parts off and put them in jars and so forth so I could build stuff with them. At any rate, the technology of vacuum tube radios had to be, in Illich's term, convivial, which meant open to exploration and capable of surviving said exploration, which semiconductor radios are not particularly good at, certainly of the time. If you made a little mistake and slipped or something, you would burn out a transistor in an instant. You didn't get any warning, but tubes would give you a warning. They would turn cherry red, and whoops, you got to stop this. So, Illich wrote a book called Tools for Conviviality. It's a very small book. My bet is that it's a spin-off of a larger book, and he wrote many books. In fact, he was famous for a book called Deschooling Society. It was published in 1970. Tools for Conviviality was 1973. And now, Tools for Conviviality I consider to be a mark of his radicalism. It's more radical than I want to be, but an interesting read nonetheless. And he basically, I guess he did most of his research for that book. The radio stuff was a certain portion of it, showing that people teach each other things in what he calls a vernacular fashion, which means not an official, structured, through the educational institutions fashion. But people learn this stuff, learn all sorts of things, and they teach each other things. And this was going on in the villages he was researching. So he postulated that, or he posited that, we don't need the educational establishment at all. That's taking it too far, in my view. But it's very interesting to think in that direction, see what happens. And at the end of that book, he has a little coda at the end in which he talks about learning webs, which is really what he's been talking about, people teaching people things. And you think, well, maybe computers could be used to organize learning webs. Yeah, you never know. And he uses a phrase that to me was a teller. 16-bit computers. Oh, he's been to MIT. He's heard them enthuse about their mini computers. Because, of course, at that time, the PDP-11 was making a triumphant arrival. And MIT was all about triumph. So, okay. I had not heard of Illich before my father actually called me up cold and told me about Tools for Conviviality. And clearly I went and read Deschooling Society after that. Like I said, if I hadn't heard about it, I wouldn't have read it. But the tools for conviviality made me realize that this is a process that I'd been involved in. And I knew something about the technological requirements to survive it and also to encourage it. And again, I'm not going to recite the whole book here, but it tells how I got into that situation, why I was there at that time, what I was thinking about. So I'll let you read that later. But Illich remained someone of great interest, and he spoke at Berkeley in I think it was 86. Could have been a little earlier. And by that time, I had one of the people I had been interacting with was his local host, and so I did attend his talk, Illich's talk, and then I was invited to an after party at somebody's house, and Illich was going to be there. Let me see. Oh, let's start in here. I met Illich at a party in 1986 when he lectured at Berkeley. His host had told him of my work, and the philosopher greeted me with, and he was called a philosopher. The philosopher greeted me with the question, "Why do you do it, Lee? Why do you put computers between people?" He went on, "If I wanted to speak with Pearl over there, I would just walk up to her and talk to her, not go dee-dee-dee with a computer." I heard him out and then replied, "What if I did not know that it was Pearl that I wanted to talk to?" Illich looked at me thoughtfully and replied, "I see what you mean." And of course, why he wouldn't have seen that just on his own initiative, I don't know. It leads to assumptions that he thought everybody would know everybody in the world. Illich always professed that 13th century Europe represented the pinnacle of civilization. He had spoken in his presentation at the university of a bicycle society organized in towns sized like 13th century European towns so that the entire town would be within sight and hearing range of the church bell tower and within bicycle traveling range. "So you see," I went on, "maybe a bicycle society needs a computer." Illich was silent. Illich's writings changed my course of thinking and opened opportunities for me to look at engineering problems as human problems, to honor my own experience and view my work as helping to offer ways for others to expand their universes as part of daily life. I sometimes wonder at how the information came to me at precisely the right moment in my trajectory. And I'll go back a paragraph. When I was working on the idea that became the Tom Swift terminal, and this was 1973. Right? Microprocessors were still too expensive, $350 for the 8080. That was the list price. Now, we didn't know that you could buy cosmetic rejects at $75, which is what MITS did, but that was 1975. So I began writing an engineering specification for such a device. Let's see. That means that the concept was that in a computer, everything is peripheral to memory, not the boss, the central processor, because there wasn't a central processor available. And so you could make a terminal, which is what I was in search of for the community memory project, by taking a piece of memory and setting up counters and stuff that would sequentially access it and draw the data out of it in order and feed that to the display screen, which in those days was a cathode ray tube. And then you would have another device, another board, which contended with the other one for access to memory, which would place data where you wanted it to be placed. So if some data was coming in down the line, it would put it in the next location if you were doing a terminal, if you were making a terminal. Or I might do something else with it if you weren't. I summarized my design philosophy in the sentence: in order to survive in a public access environment, which is what these terminals were supposed to do. And we have seen that commercially available terminals with their support contracts weren't necessarily that survivable. A piece of computer equipment must grow a computer club around itself. I included a page explaining the concept of convivial design as I understood it. So Illich made possible my thinking in that regard. Whereas my partner at that point, who was the software guy, Ephraim Lipkin, he firmly believes that the terminal should just be armored, keep the user out of it. And here I was arguing, let the user in, design the user in, give them things to play with, give them decoded terms that they wouldn't use, weren't needed for the operation of it, but could help them if they wanted to explore. And so, as I say, that was Illich's contribution to my work. Let me see. So, oh, here's a little summarizing 2 paragraphs. In 1844, Samuel F.B. Morse, an artist, chose the inaugural message for his electric telegraph as the biblical question, "What hath God wrought?" We continue to seek the answer to this day. For my part, I seek a version of the telegraph that would bring down barriers to lateral communication so that the process of self-defined community formation could be a normal and expected thing. It's been a quest worth the effort. And I've turned down some other pages here, but I'll get back to those based on our discussion and questions. Okay. So it's been successful for me in that the ideas that I formulated in the process of answering the question or attempting to answer the question of what technology should I be developing that will maximally assist in people's opportunity and ability to form and reform as necessary communities, because I observed that process in operation during the free speech movement. That's what made it successful. We won that one. And the faculty voted in our favor, administration backed off, and ta-da, the counterculture erupted on campus. And I'm not going to, again, recite the whole book, but this is entitled "The World Opens." But nothing was the same on and around campus. January 1965. Suddenly, there were no restrictions on putting up a table and hawking whatever you wanted to. Thousands of students had tasted victory in a struggle that very few predicted would not meet a bad end. I did expect to get expelled myself. I got arrested in the sit-in. 10,000 or more students at least had witnessed the mass of alienated students come together as a community to contend with and triumph over the vaunted university administration, which held the contract to administer the nation's nuclear weapons research and development lab. So they were no slouch at administration. But it didn't quite work with us. The political tables moved into the heart of the main plaza and proliferated. Innumerable students at Cal became engaged in changing their lives in small and big ways. I estimate that perhaps 5,000 dropped out to seek community elsewhere, thus seeding what eventually became the Haight-Ashbury community in San Francisco. Some students started publishing an irreverent magazine about sex, politics, drugs, and rock and roll, so they filled in a few letters and named it Spider. They had to take down their mobile of a huge spider, which was over their table. That was outside the rules, such as they were. And the publication lasted perhaps 3 issues, but it was a prototype of publications like Rolling Stone, whose future publisher was on campus at the time. I enrolled in a political science course and wrote a pamphlet on organization of a decentralized free university. I wrote a part of a pamphlet. But the magical effect was the collective euphoria that seemed to permeate the environment. Bliss was it that, as Wordsworth wrote of the French Revolution in his poem The Prelude, all seemed possible and all were involved. I believe that the free speech movement was the proximate cause of the counterculture of the 60s, which spread from the San Francisco area to the world. At the time, I wanted urgently to do what I could to keep alive the sense of possibility, the enthralling realization that large numbers of people could move together to change the world in both large and small ways. I had seen it. I had been one of those people, and I was in training to wield the most powerful tool available, technology. How then could I play a larger role in this process? Fortunately, I did not subsume my judgment to some organization, but followed my nose and kept my eyes open. Okay, and we go into analysis of that. Well, that's for later. So I've been following this vision that wonderful things can and do happen when people can communicate with each other, when the barriers between lateral communication, non-hierarchical communication go down. I'd been there and I'd seen it happen. And that was my first revolution, which is how I opened the book. And I define how I define revolution, but I'm not going to go into that minutiae at the moment. And in 1971 or so, a fellow named McLaughlin started a school for entrepreneurs in Tarrytown, New York. Sounds like it was a hustle, and maybe it was. But I heard him talk in 1984, and he pointed out that entrepreneurs are not necessarily motivated by money. This may come as a surprise, but they ran an experiment. They had plenty of students. Every one of them had a project, big idea of theirs. That's why they were there, paying money to learn about how to be an entrepreneur. They needed to do that. So they would interview each one of them, and they would say, ask them if they had an idea, and ask them how much they thought they could make from that idea. How much money could they make? And they come up with numbers. And then they would say, well, we're representing some investors, and they're interested in taking some of these ideas and bringing them to market and so forth. But the trick is, you have to give up all further involvement in the idea and its development. And we said that they offered them 3 times the amount that they had estimated they could make. Not one of them took it. Not a single one. And he said, this kind of proves that entrepreneurship is about pursuing ideas and getting them accepted into society. And generally, the major way you know they're accepted is if you make money on them. Now, once you get through that process enough, you realize there's other factors involved. But, okay. Well, I've done that in a couple of ways. I was about to say my most successful design, and now I had to realize I don't know what my most successful design was. But I'll call it that for now. The memory map video display was widely copied. And I was very happy about that because that meant acceptance. And I might have made more money on that. But the process for making more money involves constraining other people from using it, like patenting it and enforcing the patents. We did have a patent on the thing, but we could have gone up against IBM, of all people, with the IBM PC. But would that have succeeded? IBM had a strategy for this, which was concede it. Say, oh, sure, you win. But we will only offer you a cross license. We get to use any of your stuff we want, and you get to use any of our stuff. How about that? Go get rich. Well, go compete with us, right? So we knew this at the time, and nobody made a move in that direction. But the ideas that I've been involved with coming up with it, I'm not saying I originated them all. I got this big pointy head and it zaps out ideas. I work with other people, and we all develop the ideas. And I'm usually the one who pushes it further, while the others walk away and say, Lee's crazy again. These ideas have been successful. So I can claim to be a very effective entrepreneur. And it's not like, I was going to say, but I didn't make any money on it. It's not true. I made some money on it. I made royalties on this, and I made money on that by selling stock to other stockholders, which is actually legal if you own the stock, which I did. And I plowed that into community memory, which Adam Osborne thought I was insane to do. I should have, I don't know, stuffed my mouth with butter or something like that. So the money comes around, and there were even more opportunities that I didn't necessarily take up because I was focused on the next manifestations of ideas. And I'll tell you a little bit about what I'm getting involved in now. I mean, I'm 79 years old, for God's sake. My father died at 96. My mother died at 85, but she had a compromised liver. So maybe I'm going to live that long. I don't know. So I'm at the point where I need to get serious about what I'm doing. And I have all manner of projects, all incomplete, because I'm always following the one that, like the book, writing the book. That took 2 years. And I'd had to, at that point, consciously set those projects aside for later, or more importantly, for others. Okay, so the first project I'm going to get on, at some point soon, real soon, when I decide that the publicity effort for the book has caught on enough, or even before that, which is not new to me, it was the next version of community memory. Now, you've heard me say community memory. The book does explain a lot more about what it is. And the book explains more about what it will be like. I can't put it into a few words, but basically a system for supporting conversations and doing so in a fashion which is, call it convivial, which involves ignoring the regular way things are done. And I talk a little bit about the papyrus scroll, which is what you're looking at usually in Facebook and Craigslist and so forth. The first thing they got working, it made money, and they stopped development. Certainly stopped any significant radical development, like the whole user interface paradigm. So I've got a paradigm that is multidimensional. It's a book paradigm, not a papyrus scroll. And you can scroll off a line on the page and it opens another page and so forth. Books are multidimensional. Hello. That area came at me. The wall came at me. One of the fun parts of old age. So I'm going to divide. I have already started on setting out the user interface specification, which is what I have to do. The fellow who did the last version of community memory in 1989 has estimated it'll take about 2 weeks to implement this one. But I got to tell him what I want. That's the hard part. So that's my next thing. And that actually becomes part of the last thing. Last thing? Yes. My estimate is I've got maybe 10 years life of, working life left. I'll be blithering idiot by then. But there's a fellow named Robert G. Kennedy III, it turns out, lives in Oak Ridge, and a very good mechanical engineer who has analyzed one emergency solution for the climate control problem, which is basically Venetian blinds in space. A sunshade, very simple. At the Lagrangian L1 point, which is equal gravity between Earth and the sun, where there are solar observatory satellites hovering in that space, they can do that, consisting of a total area of sunshade equivalent to the area of the state of Texas, but made up of individual sunshades about 1 meter or maybe 1 square meter in area, something like that, which perform flocking behavior and can be controlled from Earth. So you can change the angle of the blinds. That's the beauty part of it. You can control this. Whenever he says geoengineering, because there's a big to-do going on about geoengineering and should it be regulated, I say, no, don't use that word. This is exoengineering. We're not on geo, we're on exo, we're out there. Here I go again, come on now. So he asked me to join the project from the standpoint of community. And I'm all for that. I will do what I can in my remaining years to work on helping set up a network of centers. We'll call them ground stations, or call them something else if somebody comes up with a better name, where we have we're covering the world with stuff places that can talk to low Earth orbit satellites, and also to that L1 point, because the Earth rotates all the time. We can't stop that. And so if we're going to be talking to something out there, we need to be everywhere on Earth, which is maybe 6 places minimum, but it could be a lot more. And these centers would have a number of functions. Number 1, be the ground stations technologically. But number 2, 3, 4, and 5, and 6, to build local networks of talent to take in, what I want to do is take in kids starting at age 11, because that's when I started learning electronics. And I've observed from some experimentation I've done that 11-year-olds will sit through a lecture and a hands-on learning process for building state machines, actually, in hardware, where 10-year-olds won't. They'll wander away. So I consider 11 to be the starting age for technological obsessiveness, let's say. But we'll get them through engineering and STEM topics. All of them won't make it, which means they'll be spinning off into the local society with a certain amount of technical knowledge, and we'll be building tools for them to use, like the state machine demonstrator, which I've spent. It's not like I've spent all that time on it. It's been developed over a very long time. I know I was working on it in 1998, which is not something to be proud of, but okay. A mark of my obsessiveness. And by doing so, by generating a local, regional, global network of these centers, there'll be benefit for those societies. I'll argue that very strenuously. And with that comes political support locally, because if you don't tend to your political support, you can be in trouble. There will arise a local power structure that says, let's see how we can take them over. But if you have the local support, they say, well, we can't do that because we'll catch hell from the people here. We need to keep flummoxed into supporting us. So it's a political process. It's a social process. It's a network process. It's going to have its own community memory system, in addition to whatever internet system it's got, and 24 gigahertz out to the L1. So it sounds like it's an interesting thing to do, an interesting problem. And we don't know the half of it. We will find out. So if I'm going to go out doing something, I want to go out doing something big like that. And my opinion of the dot-com billionaires, etc., is not very complimentary, I'm afraid. And it's that basically they are controlled by their money. And I have seen this in a couple of cases. I'm not going to get specific. But it's like they'll pay people to come and work on their projects, and you see some of them and so forth. But they couldn't do something else with the projects. In other words, they are not free. They think their money frees them. But relying on money to do it ties you down to a lot of constraints. And I don't think any of them realize it in full as they ought to. So I'm staying away from that, you see, by not having much money. But money wouldn't be the solution to my problems. Not problems, my opportunities would not lead me into opportunities. What you need is communication among large numbers of people about the benefits of what you're trying to do. You want to get their input, their support, their criticism, and make it a big party and have fun doing it. That's really important, because I spent enough of my time I'm going to be as miserable as I have to be to make everybody happy. That doesn't work. Play is something that's built into all of us. And as an argument for that, I just give you how many industrial accidents are caused by workers playing with dangerous tools and equipment. And they keep doing it. So you might as well design that into the equipment if you possibly can. That's sort of not ultimate. That's a high level of conviviality. Okay, I'm going to stop right here and take questions, because I think I may have simulated a few. Yes?
So for those of us that are kind of boxed in.
Okay. Yeah, that's what the handheld is good for. Right?
Sometimes I'm a little more of a narrow thinker once I philosophy. How does what you're envisioning for your project differ from what might be Discord or other forums that exist today?
I just put my hand on my forehead and winced when I heard Discord.
Any form.
Any form. Well, the book explains a lot of this. I'll put it that way. Like I said, in the case of Discord or Slack, also, to me, they're really the same thing. It represents the minimal development of technology, which really belongs back in the late 50s, that made some money. And so that's great. We'll just turn the crank. But no, we're not going to develop it any further. Why should we? We'll develop it away from something that's making money. And to me, it's a terrible system. It's made really its success has been with overpumped 15-year-olds who want to play games and chatter to each other and pay no attention to what each other is saying. Because you have these streams of papyrus scrolls, in effect, coming out of it. I mean, I've seen them chatter while I was making an appearance on a internet radio show, I guess. And they're jibber jabbering about, the car that I owned and things like that. And it was all pouring up and off into the ether. Nobody was ever going to go back and look at it. It didn't mean anything. Okay, they were having some fun. But there's other ways they could have fun too. Other people can do that. I'm not going to stop them. But I'm not going to, I'm still going to wince when I hear the word. So yes, a whole lot of development has been done up to the first level where it makes money, and there it stops.
So kind of, sorry, along those lines, I've seen a lot of productive technical discussion. We're involved with some competing projects, but you could also argue that it may stop at a level once it reaches a financial goal. But it evolved from, let's say, Facebook was the first thing, and then Instagram, whatever. Social media progresses, and it becomes a new thing. The evolution is another product, and it may plateau, but the next thing is coming from somewhere else. So there
I just waved my hand. Hey, I've got something I'm working on, and I hope others do too. I don't know what it is. I'm not a student of this. I'm not an academic. I'm an engineer. I'll build it and let people see it and tell me what they say. I had a hand here.
Oh, I see. If you're done, I have another.
It'll take a long time for me to be done. So go ahead.
So in the book, you were very frank about your struggles with mental health, which I appreciated as someone who does struggle with that. Have you thought about how your community memory project can make strides in connecting people with resources that can help them, since that's a big thing in the world right now?
I would say that's one of its main motivations. That is to say, what I want to do is empower conversation, not shouting at people, not blithering and letting it all fly away into the ionosphere. Conversations are, I can't say it, how can I encompass it? It's some say that we are conversations within ourselves, and this becomes called mental health or whatever, and also we are conversations with other people. That's an interesting philosophical way to look at it. But it's one of the best things I can think of to facilitate. And of course, and just as a point, my concept is the regulation mechanism is going to be other people who inhabit the system in a couple of different forms as reference people. They also inhabit it as journalists, just to talk about what they see, not have any power to do anything about it. And so the real trick is to be able to design that way of managing a system. The whole thing is supposed to be a commons of information. And commons as the plural is the same as the singular. So commons require management. It's self-management. And this happens with fisheries, for instance, throughout the world. They won't work if they are not managed. The fishermen, the fisher people, there's not too many women fishermen working commercial fisheries, get together and agree on that. And that predates capitalism. It predates almost everything we know, because getting fish out of the ocean is a hard job and dangerous. And you can't build a fence around the sea. So somebody, with a lot of money can't come in and say, well, I own all of this now. No, you can't do that. So it's a challenge for really the management of a commons of information. And my approach is basically, you don't rely on algorithms, you don't rely on machines, you rely on people. And that's hard enough. And in that process, like I say, of facilitating the process of conversation in general, it extends inside people as well as out and among people. So I'll leave it at that point because I haven't got the whole book written for that. Other questions, you need to come up because of short cord. Come up here. Come.
First of all, thank you very much. The talk's been inspiring. I agree with a lot of what you said about how communication these days is broken down. And I mean, Discord is just a reskinned IRC, which was written 30 years ago. And you look at the state of tribalism today, and you wonder if it's due to echo chambers and people not really having a conversation, but trying to earn clout or just make a it's for their own edification is what I'm trying to say. So I'm very interested in your concept of a new communication network. But one thing that, I'm recently interested in technology. I'm older, so, I'm not in the field per se.
I'm old.
Right, but you mentioned, you were into this stuff when you were 11. So I started getting into programming only like 3 years ago or so. I'm still pretty new at it, but I'm not interested in doing it for money or getting a job. I just want to help build stuff like you're talking about, And one of the things I'm really looking at is I look at the fragility of our current networks. They rely on a few choke points in the terms of undersea cables, very fragile software running the web servers, the backbone of the internet. How would your project look to harden those things? How could somebody like me aid in that?
There's a great deal of effort, great deal of development work going on in that direction. I am discovering. At the very least, there's something called the D-Web, the distributed web. I sort of blundered into that. My late wife in 2019 said, "You are going to this conference for the distributed web." Huh? What? And so I went and discovered that I was unable to participate in any of the software discussions because that's not my technology. But they had a meeting on community networks. And I found that very productive for me. They are still going with this. They're working through the Internet Archives. And there are apparently several other back-end systems that are being developed. I can't remember the names. I'm not good at remembering them. Which essentially replace in function the back end of the internet and do so in a fashion where it is not centralized. That's a tough problem. So there's a lot of these that need help. You should look into them. It's like I look at it from my distance, which means that I can't bring many critical faculties to bear because, again, not my technology. But I sure would like to use them if they are what they say. If I get my sort of front end together, they're the back ends. And in fact, as a matter of some irony, apparently, what D-Web has been working on and has got up to some demonstrable level, which I'm not fully aware of, is essentially an implementation of the last season of Silicon Valley's system. Remember that? Where they don't even have their back end working. They have to give a demo. They do that, and it links up to a refrigerator's computer. And that links up to other of its fellow refrigerators, and on and on. It draws resources from networks of opportunity. Well, clearly, that's a great comedic element. I had a wonderful time watching that. But that's fictions, and they're actually trying to implement that sort of thing. It leads one to believe that, is this where the good ideas come from? Okay, maybe. You never know. So there's stuff going on. You need to look into it better than I've looked into it about the decentralized back ends, which are so far beyond my comprehension that I'm just assuming something will be there when we get there, which hasn't always worked for me. That help?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay. Others?
You mentioned the music on the Altair. Anyone's welcome to key in that program on an Altair. There are a couple working ones out on the floor. Dave Guestwine has that running on the PDP-8 that he's been restoring. So if anyone wants to hear that who hasn't, see Dave or me or Brendan can demonstrate that. And we also have some sound going on the Link 8 now, where it's been hooked up to the processor. So if you haven't seen that, ask for it. It's a rare treat.
You'll break them. Okay, yes?
As an engineer speaking, what is the most common problems you had to repetitively work on throughout your career? I find that there's a lot of common basic things that recur all the time, whether it's hardware, software, people management, or community issues. For you, as an engineer speaking, what are the most common problems you've had to solve repetitively in your career?
Well, that's a pretty tough question. And I don't have a simple answer for it. I guess it's because I try to ignore problems. That's one approach. It's not a very good one, but it does work.
Sometimes works.
Yes. Linus Van Pelt from Peanuts is a poster saying, "No problem is so big or complicated that it cannot be run away from." And strangely enough, that's actually that's less ridiculous than it sounds. Because when you run away from them, you run somewhere else that everyone else isn't looking at and looking towards, let's say. Well, we know that we have to do that. No, you don't. If you, what is it? Okay. In the Osborne, you will not find a display controller chip. You'll find a strange little combination of 3 small-scale integrated chips. A little 4-bit counter, a 3-input NAND gate, and 1 or 2, I don't know, remember which they are, but 2 input gates. That's it. Because the Z80 has the capability built into it. Had, because they took it out recently. The refresh signal. What was that there for? That was there to give a signal to the memory that it's not being used at the moment, so go do your refresh cycle, for which dynamic memories need to do. So they put that in, and whenever they designed it, 1974, 5, or 6. And there it sat until I got there. And I realized that, okay, well, I've got to get data out of the memory into the screen, but I could make that the refresh process as well if I organize the address bits the right way. And so I did, and it works. And then, like I say, Zilog, within the last 10 years, made the refresh signal go away because nobody was using it. So if you're going to build a replica of the Osborne, you got to use the old Z80, right? Okay. Well, I didn't think about them doing that. I thought the Z80 would be the Z80 forever. Anyway, they'd outlasted the company. And you by understanding what you really need and seeing odd ways of implementing that. You know, we did away with a $10 chip. And $10 is a lot of money for a chip in this design. Most of those chips are like $1 or $2 chips, the big ones, except maybe for the disk controller. But the point of that is, when you get to the level of CRT controllers or disk controllers, they're never multiply sourced. Actually, the disk controller is, strangely enough. But you're likely to get caught in a trap where you have no alternative. You have to build it into your product, and it's only available from one source, and they will tell you how much you will pay for them. And a lot of people will say, well, it's well known that you have to have it. No, it's not well known. It's commonly done. That's different. So running away from problems, you know, I guess if you retain the concept that you're running towards something, and you better be thinking about that, not just running away. That's one of the secrets of creativity.
Paraphrase. So don't hyperfix on a problem. Don't make a mountain out of a molehill. Find other solutions around it and get to your goal.
That's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Don't make your problem limit what you do. That's an easy way of saying it.
Thank you.
Okay, yes?
Do you have criteria for determining whether a conversation is happening or not?
Oh dear. I haven't done enough thinking on it to be able to answer that question intelligently.
So you mentioned community and communication.
Yeah.
And conversations.
Uh-huh.
Conversations for conviviality. And
I
okay,
didn't
I'm just
necessarily tie the
interested
two
in
together.
how you're differentiating between conversations versus mere communication. Maybe you can speak to that.
Well, I can make something up.
Okay, that's fine.
You know, and in fact, I'll probably have to do that eventually. You know, so the definition of a conversation, well, generally it's understood that there's an equality. First of all, it's not controlled by an outside structure. It's each side has the same opportunity to contribute. And that has all kinds of implications in terms of modifying or working around all manner of social barriers, which I can't define in total. But basically, somebody once told me, one of my elementary school chums later in life, in high school or something, told me that, you know, real conversations are very rare, because everybody in the conversation has to be saying exactly what they are thinking. And I'm not sure if that's true, but he was saying this, so I'll stick with this for now. I think what he implied, which I will imply, is that conversations are carried out at a very visceral level. The more closer you get to your social environment, your status or whatever affecting it, it becomes something else. It degrades. So there's a discipline to be learned there. And if the technology is good enough, I hope, the technology will lead you to that point. Whether you get there is up to you, but the technology will enable that. That's the kind of thing I want to develop, see? I don't know if anybody understands that, but I only half understand it. So that's my answer. You have more to say.
Yeah, just, I mean, I'm hearing you center around the content as well as the technology to some degree, right? And so I'd be curious about what cultural assumptions are either minimum or prerequisites for conversations, and that's it.
And unfortunately, I can't
Yeah,
answer
that's
that.
fine.
That's beyond where
We're
I've gotten to. Okay, so want to come up?
Lee, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much. And I'm really curious about. So you're in the Bay Area from 1963 on, and you're kind of moving between these groups. And I'm imagining, on the one hand, you're working at community memory and a very organic, community-driven sort of ideal. And you're also working with Adam Osborne on this, company that would grow and succeed and then fail spectacularly. Tell me a little bit about, like, you seem to be in this conduction band between different groups, and you can call them peer groups, from one direction or another. But how did you move between those, and how did you balance those discussions and
It's in the book. It's simple. Okay. Well, around 1970 and 71, I'm still working with the breakaway underground paper that I'd gone with, as it turns out worse and worse. And like new generations of really kids come in, and they haven't got a clue what journalism is about. And it seemed to me that all they've ever learned is how to be consumers. You're sitting around, unable to think of anything to do, and said, let's have a party, or let's get some stuff together, and have fun just by buying stuff and eating it or whatever. They could do that really well. So I'm there, I'm working, I've co-signed for the van and so forth, and it gets repossessed at one point. And one of them says to me, how do you do it, Lee? And this was somebody I didn't respect. How do you move between two worlds like that? And my answer was simple. Don't you know there's only one world? I'm not moving anywhere. It's just where you decide to erect barriers. Someone you won't deal with. Now, I didn't want to deal with that fellow who asked the question because he had been pretty much of a jerk earlier, and I reserve the right to do that. But there's no predetermined. Well, I guess it's silos here. They don't come pre-made. We will, each of us, tend to define the world that way, and I just choose to deal with whoever I'm dealing with one-on-one, and not think of the clothes I'm wearing or that they're wearing. It's in the book.
Yeah. Now I remember.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. All right.
So I'm not sure if you're familiar with the demo scene. It's basically a group of software pirates that would write little intros to the software that they cracked.
Uh-huh.
And this is a very thankless act because the company that you crack their software for isn't going to thank you. And the people that are copying the software just want the software. So they started writing these little audiovisual intros or whatever to show off their programming skills and be like, see, this is actually a hard job, but maybe if I show you a little bouncing logo bouncing around the screen and show you a star field and a 3D object on a Commodore 64, you'll think this is very cool, and you'll realize that I'm a good programmer, sort of thing. So I'm just thinking, I watch, I haven't been able to watch, but I watch you talking about the development of memory mapped graphics and text display, and watching that evolve into CRTCs and display controllers. And then I hear you talk about how we go from just radio interference and EFI going into programmable sound generators and DACs and computers and eventually DSPs and everything. And this scene to me, the demo scene I'm talking about, these guys are very involved in like finding the coolest hack, to turn a CRTC up on its end and do something that's not designed to do, or something very impressive, or that sort of a thing. Maybe centering around maybe the 80s and 90s is probably a good place to put yourself in time and say, is there a coolest hack, sound, video, whatever, that really changed your mind about what someone had done with your technology or something you'd seen?
I'm going to exercise my prerogative as a very old man and visit the bathroom. Stay here. I'll answer when I get back.